All right. So we're going to have Sandy Richtie talk to us on data and metadata for language technologies supporting thousands of languages. Thank you very much, Sandy, for being here with us, and you can go ahead with your talk.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to the University of Cape Coast AI webinar series. Very excited to be here to talk to you all today about this topic, data and metadata for language technologies supporting thousands of languages. So just a quick intro. Yeah, just like in case, I'm sure everyone's aware of this already, but just in case you didn't know, there are more than 7,000 languages spoken around the world today. And most language technologies typically only support in the order of tens or at most hundreds of those languages. So you can see that straight away there's a big gap there in terms of what if the ideal state was that every language technology supported every single language, there's lots and lots and lots of work to do in order to get to that place. So yeah, like things like automatic translation, Google Translate, speech recognition, speech synthesis, even like the new thing which is these AI chatbots. They could all be a lot more inclusive, and there are many changes which are required in order for us to get to that point. So today we're just going to look at two kind of fundamental requirements to get to the point where these technologies are available for many more languages. I'm not sure if having every technology available for every language is really feasible, given that many languages are spoken by very few people, and many are also endangered and possibly not going to be around for a significant amount of time longer. But what we should be really doing is looking at how we can support, say, the 1,000 most widely spoken languages in the world. And if your technology covers those 1,000 most widely spoken languages, you are already supporting something like 97 or 98% of the population of the world with those 1,000 languages. So it's not universal coverage, but you're to the first approximation supporting like nearly everybody. So yeah, let's get into it. First of all, we're going to look at metadata. So, I mean, yeah, what is metadata and why does metadata matter? So, in order to even begin the process of mapping out the kind of possibility space of what we can do in terms of language technology support and improving language technology support, we need to basically define what it is that we're talking about. So, which are these languages? What are the kind of key facts about them? So how many speakers do they have? What writing systems do they use? What's the name of the language? Like these kind of really basic facts can help us to sort of like define the roadmap for where it is that we want to go. And also, things like language names is like really important when you're adding your language into say, just something really simple like the menu that allows you to choose the language from a list of languages when you're like, setting an app for your preferences. And I'm sure, many of us are aware of the inherent problems that are present there, because sometimes you see your language and it's like defined or referred to with this name, which is not really the name that the people actually use, or it's some kind of like official name or something that's like not actually like in sync with what the community would really prefer to be represented as. And so like even as something as simple as a language name is really difficult to get right. So yeah, like metadata can really help us with defining what it is we're trying to do, which languages are we going to go to, or which ones are we going to do first, and then how do we represent languages in our applications. And then yeah, like kind of when you're developing programs to expand your product to more languages, or your technology to more languages, the metadata really helps you with like scoping out the project and like deciding what you're going to do first, for example. Ooh, just go back here. So yeah, we have developed LinguaMeta, which is on GitHub now, and you can go and access it and play around with it. It's basically a repository of a mixture of open source and some proprietary Google metadata for basically all spoken living languages. That's a kind of constraint that we put in it. So we don't include, for example, historical languages or constructed languages. And we currently don't also include sign languages because most of the technologies that we work on at Google, for example, translation and speech technologies, are really designed and set up for spoken languages. But we do hope to include sign languages in the future. And I think like there is definitely, as you were saying earlier, Stephen, there's much more work to do there on things like sign-to-speech translation, those kind of applications. But for the moment, since our scope is really in the kind of spoken domain, we're focused on living spoken languages, and that's already a lot. So we increased a kind of previous version of this from about 3,000 languages to 7,500 languages, which I think is pretty much all the living spoken languages which are defined in external repositories today. So yeah, we did a lot of work to kind of compile and standardize all of this metadata, and we conducted it, where there were gaps and issues with what we found. We kind of conducted additional research and, in many cases, cleaned up what we found. And then what's really important in our repo is that we have marked each data point for its source, so you can always trace back the data point to its source, and that will help hopefully to both backlink LinguaMeta to the sources that it drew from, but also if we've highlighted an issue in the source, we can also interact with that source and hopefully improve that source, and then sync back LinguaMeta with the source so that everything becomes better over time. Yes, so the repo is available in two formats. So there's on the GitHub, which I can share afterwards. There's a TSV, which is basically just you can download it and basically look at it in a spreadsheet for easy browsing. And then there's also this JSON format, which is what I'm showing on the right there, which is a more kind of structured representation of the data where you can see. So this is the entry for Romanian, I believe. So you can see we've got there the language code which is used, the number of speakers, if it has official status, its script, the country where it's spoken, and then its location in the world. But there's more metadata. This is just kind of a mini example just to sort of illustrate how it looks. So yeah, there are 20 metadata categories in LinguaMeta from 8 different sources. So the sources there on the right. And we include language codes, so different standards, so the BCP standard, the ISO 639 standard. Then we include language names, which I'll talk a bit more about in a bit. It's probably the most, what's the word, voluminous and complicated part of the repo, because there's just, you wouldn't believe it, but for every single language, there are many, many names. And then there are all the names of all the languages in all the other languages. So, we tried our best to standardize and collate what's going on there, but there's a lot of diversity there. Then number of speakers, writing systems, locales in the sense of countries or regions where the language is spoken, geographic coordinates, official status, and endangerment status. So yeah, this is kind of this is from our paper. This is what an entry looks like for a language, in a little bit more human readable way. So you can see here for Romanian, we've got all these different language codes, including things like there are deprecated language codes for some languages. So we do include that in the repo because it's useful sometimes, because some repositories or other resources don't use the same standards, or they do use historical or deprecated codes. So we've really tried hard to bring together all of the different ways that a language can be referred to or represented. Is there a question? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes, please. My name is Richtie, and I want to ask if the process you are talking about, websites I can get the metadata types from or something.
Yeah, so we haven't got so far in creating a kind of searchable website where you can go and interact with the metadata yet. What we've done so far is open sourced all of the metadata and released it on GitHub. And yeah, like I said, there is this TSV format where you can look at the metadata in a kind of human readable format. But yeah, we do have plans. I'm glad you asked that question, yeah, because we do have plans to also create a kind of interactive resource where you can go and find out more about human languages and interact with this data in a more interesting way. I mean, yeah, it's a long process, and yeah, this is kind of where we are at the moment. We've just kind of defined space for now. Thanks for the question. Yeah, you can see there's also
Okay. And
go ahead. Okay, yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah.
so after, please.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say it again? Yeah, I'll just keep going and maybe we can come back to the question at the end. So yeah, we have also some more specific types of language code. So you can see we're also linking in glottolog. So that uses this special glotto code, which they've defined for themselves. And then there's also the Wikidata code, which is available through glottolog. And like as I said, like all of these different types of code, just to allow you to more easily like link between all of the various resources which are already in existence. So you can imagine like when we have some kind of web page for each of the languages, we'll have just like a bunch of links at the bottom, and these codes allow you to very easily like construct that hyperlink just from like piecing together, the prefix and then this code, and that'll take you off to other resources. So it was a lot of work, and it really like a kind of long time consuming process, but we have basically the union of all of these codes for every single living spoken language in the world in LinguaMeta now. Then yeah, moving on to names. So you can see here we've got the English name in the sense of like the one which is generally agreed upon to be the canonical name for the language. But like I said, there's a lot more to say about that, and I'll come back to the language names in a minute. And then we have the endonym. This was a very special case where it's actually like quite a difficult thing to find. So the endonym is the name for the language in the language. So the language's own name for itself. And yeah, like this is not really widely available in any existing repositories. So in fact, I'll look more at statistics later, but we had to basically curate this information for ourselves. So we had an intern who just kind of looked up endonyms for many languages. I think the 1,000 most widely spoken languages in the world. And then yeah, like I said, names in other languages, the estimated number of speakers, which is also kind of fraught with problems in many cases, any writing systems which are used, and that's like not a simple one-to-one mapping, because as we know, some languages have more than one writing system. Then countries or regions where it's spoken, the coordinates. The coordinates is kind of tricky. Like obviously, a language is not spoken in a single point. It's actually usually spoken over a diffuse area, or even in various non-contiguous areas when you look at like international languages. So the point is from glottolog, and we kind of represent it without much modification. I think it's not particularly helpful for representing languages, except in the sense that when you want to create like a map of some subgroup of languages, it's quite a kind of useful way to represent the information. So we do include it with those caveats. Then yeah, official status, whether it's endangered or how endangered it is. And then these categories are from the ISO standard, so it's scope. So basically that basically means whether it's an individual language or like a macro language. So something like Chinese would be a macro language, and then Mandarin and Cantonese would be the individual languages which are under the kind of scope of the macro language Chinese. Then yeah, Romanian doesn't have these other types of BCP codes because it's not a macro language. And then yeah, a description which comes from Wikidata. So that's basically the kind of a summary of all of the bits and pieces of information which are in the repo. So yeah, how did we do this? So yeah, we basically pulled this data in from all the sources that I showed, and they were compiled and standardized, and then often, as I said, like manually curated and improved. And yeah, I just like to pick out three categories here, which caused us some interesting challenges. So yeah, what population statistics, first of all, why is that important? So yeah, obviously, if you are saying to your boss, I want to add 50 more languages to my app this year, and probably the first question they're going to ask you is, which ones are you going to choose? And population size is one of the primary metrics that we use to prioritize among various competing candidates for like it's some sort of language extension project. So yeah, we include population statistics in the repo. And basically, what's tricky here is that often what we found is that we see population statistics reported either for a language or for the country or region where the language is spoken, or like, you know, if a language is spoken in multiple countries, then some kind of breakdown of the population. But what is interesting is that if you look at those statistics across different source repositories, sometimes like the number that is reported for a language in a country in one repository is actually larger than the number for the entire language in another repository. So there's a lot of like, you know, disagreement or discrepancies between various sources in, you know, what is available, and there it's like it's kind of quite difficult to make like informed decisions, because, you know, there's no like source of truth. I mean, I guess you could go to things like census data from governments, but actually like governments don't typically include like the many hundreds of languages that are spoken in a specific country. I mean, I'm not sure what the case is in Ghana, but you know, I know in America, for example, in the US, they only include like a few possible, you know, responses for what language do you speak. So yeah, even there, like this information basically isn't really clear and isn't really like widely available. And so yeah, we've had to do a lot of, you know, intervention, rounding of the statistics to kind of avoid giving like a false sense of exactness about these statistics. So if you're going to use this, you know, data from LinguaMeta, I'm just, you know, adding this big caveat that it isn't really reliable in many cases, and there are a lot of issues. And yeah, like another inherent issue is like, obviously there are many L2 speakers, so like second language speakers of many languages, and are those, you know, counted within the count for a language? So, you know, if we only count L1 speakers for English, it probably has, I think it's something like 500 million. But if you include all the L2 speakers, it's probably the most widely spoken language in the whole world. So, you know, that's like, it's kind of a complicated issue. And yeah, like there's also, you know, people who speak 10 languages. Are we counting that person 10 times for every language that they speak? Obviously we should, but that's like, that would, you know, if you're then adding up all of your statistics together, you're artificially inflating the population. You'd have more than the population of the world in total, because you counted that, you know, person in 10 different kind of buckets for every language that they speak. So yeah, this is like a kind of really complicated area, but it's really interesting, and yeah, I'm happy to talk more about this if anyone has questions at the end. Yeah, another issue is writing systems. So, you know, obviously for technologies like automatic translation and speech recognition and text-to-speech, knowing the script or the scripts that are used to write a language is a very important, you know, piece of information to know. And this is like not, you know, a simple question in many cases. So there, like a good example is the languages that are spoken in both Pakistan and India. So in India, take something like Punjabi, it's typically written with the Gurmukhi script, so a kind of Indic script. And then in Pakistan, it's actually written with Perso-Arabic script. So the same language has two different scripts in two different countries. And there, you know, technology companies and anyone who's working on, you know, technology development has to kind of make a choice. Like, are we localizing for the Indian market, for example, or the Pakistan market? So, you know, which way are we going to go in terms of which scripts are we supporting? Or, you know, obviously the good thing to do would just be to do both. But when you have limited resources, sometimes that you do have to kind of come down one side of the fence and make a decision, you know, and that can cause like all kinds of issues. So just having this, you know, definition and making sure that you're clear about what the decision is that you're making, and making that decision with all the kind of information that's available to you is really important. So, you know, this is something that we've worked hard to curate and collect for many languages. And, you know, one thing to say about the writing system metadata piece is that it actually isn't really widely available in the other major repositories which are, you know, in existence. Ethnologue, I think maybe Ethnologue does have it, but Ethnologue is not open source, so you can't just like download their data and, you know, use it. Glottolog doesn't include it. most repos don't have this. So LinguaMeta is like the most comprehensive resource for this particular piece of information. Yeah, as well as just like, the script tag itself, we have also developed a kind of set of tags for scripts. So like, as well as there being multiple scripts for a language, another issue is that sometimes the scripts that are used for a language are not always used for the same set of purposes. So sometimes one will only have like a kind of official use, but then there's actually another script which is used like in reality by the population, or a script that's used for transliteration, or things like Braille, which are used for kind of accessibility purposes, which are used to write language, but only for a certain specific group. So yeah, like we tried to kind of bring together all this information, enrich it with these tags to make it more useful for people for different purposes, and then where there are gaps, which there are many, it's not possible to find this information, like I said, in other existing repos. We did do a little bit of kind of assumption filling in. So in a country like Australia, which has many indigenous languages, we believe that all of those languages are written with the Latin script, if they're written at all. So we basically just have this kind of assumed tag in the repo where we say we think that this language is written in Latin script, but we're just assuming that based on the country where it's spoken. So that's the kind of another way of like filling in the many gaps which exist in this area. Then language names. So language names allow us to develop more accurate and well localized user interfaces. So like I was saying earlier, one important thing is to represent the language correctly when you're adding this language to like a menu in an app for a new product or a new technology. And then we also have to make sure that we do that in every localized version of that app. So like every name for every language needs to be present in every version of the app in order to correctly or appropriately show the list of languages which are available. And so you can see here on the right that these are just some of the names for Punjabi. So there are many and various names for Punjabi, and I think I'm not sure we've got the endonym. The endonym would be the Perso-Arabic script one there, and also the Gurmukhi one on the next line. So one thing we did is obviously try and find out what's the name for every language in every other language. But then also we found that there are many variant alternative names in English and in other languages. So we have tried as far as we can to mark one name as canonical in the resource. And that allows you to sort of, by default pick our canonical name, although we do also include all alternative names. So like, I guess one relevant example for the audience would be like, Twi is usually called Twi, but sometimes it's also called Akan. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's something about language varieties and like a macro language there. But like I see both of those in different apps, and it's not very standard the way that it's represented. And that's a good example of where we should just basically go with the community's wishes and ask the community what they would prefer, and then just go with that, which I think we have done. I think with Google, we mostly settled on Twi now for AK, that language AK. We do also include over 2,000 endonyms, and that was a very manual process to collect those, and it's really fun to see those because it's just really interesting to see how a language refers to itself in each case. And where the language has more than one endonym in two different scripts. So Punjabi would be the example again. So you have Punjabi in the Perso-Arabic script, and then Punjabi in the Gurmukhi script. We also tag the name with the script that it appears in. So that's just helpful in case you're trying to sort of like marry up, the English name for the language with its endonym, and then there are two possible choices, and you have to select among them. So we make sure that we include both in those kind of cases. Just a little bit about the kind of coverage of the metadata. So we have like basically 100% coverage for the language codes, obviously, because they're like standard, and English names we are basically feature complete. and endangerment status is very close to also being complete, because we get that, I think, from Glottolog, I believe. And then about 85% coverage is like writing systems, coordinates, number of speakers, and yeah, only 15% coverage for endonyms at the moment. So, if anyone's interested in contributing to this, like, yes, it's on GitHub, and we'll happily accept feature requests or additions to the repo. Yeah, that's a good segue to this slide. So, we really need help, because we've done our best to create and collate all this information and make sure that we're linking back to the sources. But there are already, I've heard feedback from people that there are many inherent problems in the sources, which we have unfortunately replicated in LinguaMeta. Yeah, one really important thing which I think we should add in future, which we don't currently have, is language varieties. So, beyond, like, this is kind of beyond the ISO standard. So ISO encodes like languages in the sense of individual languages, not macro languages, and not language varieties. So there are attempts to codify and define all language varieties in the world, but at the moment the best one that I know of is not fully released under an open source license, so we weren't able to include it in the current release of LinguaMeta. But watch this space. We're working on that, and hopefully we will include that in the future. Yeah, we also like to improve the writing system definitions, which is kind of an ongoing process, and improve our population statistics. As I said, there are many inherent problems there. And yeah, this is the paper, in case you're interested. It's online, and please take a look, and also take a look at the repo, which is linked from the paper. I'll go on to data, but before I go on to data, I wonder if anyone's got any questions about anything I just said on metadata.
Yeah, so a quick question is, so for instance, what's the name? So for instance, for Akan, if I take Ghana for Akan, there's a tree. There are about 2 different ones, and then there is Fanti under the Akans. So I'm wondering, because already there's a Wikimedia community on Fanti, which is also trying to now collect huge amounts of data. So I'm wondering what this will become. For instance, if there's such a data available, would you then go and change the AK and give it a new name?
So I think that Fante has a different ISO code, so it's FAT.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So I think that basically the ISO standard is, I mean, yeah, this is to kind of like engage with the question in a kind of broader sense. Like, the ISO standard is very imperfect, and encodes all kinds of sort of strange distinctions, which are maybe like better defined as like language varieties rather than languages. But because it's in existence and it's so widely used in, basically all of the major technology companies use it as a kind of interoperating standard. Like, imagine you're, I don't know, using your Google Translate app on your iPhone, and your keyboard is set to some language, right? All of those things have to talk to each other and like exchange the language code and say, what language you'd like to be, what language your phone is set to, what language you'd like to be input, what your keyboard is doing, what the translate should do, and in order to achieve that, we have to have some kind of international standard. And what we use is the BCP 47 language codes. So AK for Aklan/Twi, and FAT for Fante. But if the situation on the ground is more complicated, and actually the ISO code is kind of, the ISO encoding is kind of deficient, then there is this possibility, which is kind of a slow and laborious process, but it is possible to apply to the ISO organization and like change the standard. You can do that. I think that a good example would be Quechua. So Quechua in South America, I think there used to be maybe just a few ISO codes or one ISO code, and the community successfully applied for them. I think there are now like more than 40 codes which encode every variety of Quechua. So like there they've successfully improved the standard and changed it to reflect to the variety of the situation as they see fit. Any other questions on metadata, or I can move on?
No, I think you can move on.
Sounds good. Okay, so on data, so this is maybe I should have said this at the beginning. I'm basically presenting two papers that we presented at LREC, the Language Resource and Evaluation Conference, which happened a little bit earlier in the year. And that first one was the open source release of LinguaMeta. And now I'm going to talk about the other paper that we wrote, which is about this narrative around data scarcity for I don't want to use the word long tail, but the many hundreds and hundreds of languages which are poorly supported by current technologies. So yeah, there's this paper which is quite often cited by Joshi and his friends, which says that 88% of the 2,500 languages in their study have exceptionally limited resources in the repos that they looked at. And they said it will be a momentous and probably impossible effort to lift them up into the digital space. So basically our paper and the talk now, I'm going to try and engage with this, and hopefully I feel like this is a kind of dangerous and slightly damaging myth, and I hope to dispel this myth. Actually, if you look at what's around, and explore a wider range of resources than what Joshi and his friends looked at in their study, you can find many, many resources which have, maybe not like exactly the format and type of data that you need for your purpose, but you can find all kinds of language data for thousands and thousands of languages. And in our study, which goes a lot deeper into this, we found that more than 20 online resources contain data for more than 3,000 languages. So just to compare what they said, so nearly all of the languages in their study have limited resources, and it'll be impossible to lift them up into the digital space. It's just not the case. Like that, there's so much out there which is available for anyone to use. So let's just look at a few examples. So yeah, take a glottolog, right at the top there. Glottolog basically encodes, defines reference materials. So like all of the references that are available in like linguistics journals and linguistics books, and family trees, metadata, the kind of thing I was talking about before, and also information about language varieties for like 8,000 languages. Okay, it's not exactly data, but it's like data, it's like what LinguaMeta is, sort of the thing that you would need in order to kind of create like a kind of language expansion project. And then looking down a little bit, something like script source, that actually defines like the orthographic, standard for more than 8,000 languages. And then if we go a little bit further, so something like the Global Recordings Network. So this is a website which contains not Bible readings, but kind of short versions of things like the story of Jesus, and they're sort of like biblical stories, and it has those stories read out, so recordings of native speakers reading those stories, and they include over 7,000 languages. In fact, they actually include something like 16,000 language varieties. So this is actually one of the resources where the definitions of language varieties, could potentially become the standard. But abstracting away from language varieties, that they have like audio data in over 7,000 languages. So this idea that there isn't audio data out there for all of the languages in the world. Like if you agree that there are around 7,000 or so languages in the whole world, then here we've already found a resource where most or even all languages are covered with audio data. Let's look a bit further. Yeah, what about Ankrubadan? Ankrubadan, unfortunately, I think it's currently offline, but the raw data is available on GitHub, and there you can find a text corpora for over 2,000 languages. So like even there, you know, that's like much greater than the 88% of Joshi's 2,500 language sample. You know, there's a huge amount of text data available in all languages, and you know, as I'm going to say, like even if you can't find just like an off-the-shelf resource like this where you could just go and like download everything, you know, the web itself exists, and text lang ID models exist, so it wouldn't be, you know, a momentous challenge to just, you know, go and look for your own text data by scraping websites or, you know, downloading Wikipedia or whatever it is. You know, obviously, I should say the caveat here is that you should check the licensing restrictions on anything that you use and make sure that you're, you know, complying with the licenses which are put on the data. I'm not suggesting that, you know, people should go and just take all this and do whatever they want with it, but the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, actually there's like way more than what Joshi and his friends said, and you know, that the fact that that paper gets regularly cited as some kind of, you know, death knell of NLP for, you know, low resource languages is a shame, because it's not really the case, and I hope that more people look at this instead and also look at these resources and confirm what we've tried to find, because, you know, this is very like, you know, bird's eye view of the situation. We didn't really go into, like, say for example, which languages are supported on which of these resources. You know, that would be an amazing thing to do, and you could do some of that work with what I showed earlier with the language codes. So like some of these resources have basically one page for each language, and you can construct that URL using the prefix and then the language code. They've made that nice for you. But then others, so like if you go on the paper, you can click on these links on the right, which is like the count, the number of languages which are in the resource. And some of them, like, it's incredibly difficult to even find where they define like which languages they support. It's all hidden behind some, you know, menu, and it's not really like obvious or clear. But you know, despite those problems, we managed to like find this, and you know, we've done our best here. But there's lots more work to do to kind of actually start to link all this data, say like to LinguaMeta, to the metadata, and show that, you know, like here, like as well as what's its name, how many speakers does it have, like here's where you could find text data, here's where you could find audio data, you know, even here's like where there are models, and some beyond that, like here's all the technologies which are available. So Google has text-to-text translation, and they've also included speech recognition, and you can type on a keyboard. You know, there are many like also commercial applications that are available for each language, which you could also kind of like link, you know, in a way to the metadata. So I feel like it's just this case of slowly adding more and more and more fields to the table, like just joining on more and more of these things until you have like a really clear picture of where each language is kind of along that journey from being unresourced or under-resourced to being much better resourced. So yeah, how do we go about operationalizing all this data? So, you know, one thing is to go and find it, but you know, there's a lot of work beyond having found the raw data to getting it to the point where it's useful for something like training a machine learning model. So like there are really good foundations with, say, pre-trained models and transfer learning. So like in context learning, so like there are lots of ways in which you don't need to be an ML expert in order to be able to like use this data to, or you know, to extend an existing pre-trained model, for example, like to a new language. Yeah, like there are like interesting kind of research challenges in how we can like benefit from these, like say like slightly alternative data sources. To say something like, you know, the resources that are available on Glottolog in terms of linguistic materials, so linguistics papers and grammar books. So there's this really interesting paper, can't remember the author right now, but it's called Machine Translation from One Book, where he basically he taught an LLM a new language just by showing it a grammar book, like a descriptive grammar written by a linguist. And then he tested it against himself. So he also read the grammar book, and then he sort of tested whether him or the LLM were better at translating English sentences into the language, which is really just like, it's a really cool paper. I can link it afterwards. But yeah, like that, you know, another major challenge is, you know, how do you tolerate noise? So, you know, obviously a lot of this data is not going to be particularly high quality. You need to do a lot of work to standardize it, clean it up. Some, for audio, for example, things like, encoding standards, like throwing away audio that doesn't actually contain data in the language, or just contains like music or other things. And then like for text data, there's a lot of like normalization you need to do, like all the general NLP tasks. I think also, like, to broaden out a little bit, there are a lot of challenges for us, like language technologists, I guess you could say, as a field. So we really need to work more with like other kinds of disciplines. So one really important area is language documentation. So there are linguists going out and collecting and using data for research for many hundreds of highly endangered languages. What could we do there to both help them in their research and also potentially help the community? I mean, which is more important, to help the community to maintain their language and have a more sustainable future. There are many things you could do. I just think something simple like little offline translation apps which would enable translation between the local language and, say, the language of wider communication would be really helpful. And yeah, another interesting area is, like, if you're going into that kind of thing, you really have to think a lot more about how people will interact with the technology and making sure that the UX is there at a point where anybody in the community could use it without having to learn a whole new paradigm of menus and buttons to click through, when that's not something that they necessarily have much experience of or a background in. And yeah, I think also, like, bringing in more people to this area, like bringing in people from academia, like I said, bringing in people from industry, also language activists, like non-profits, that kind of thing, like getting all these people who are kind of interested in the space of like doing something to improve the situation for a language, and like aligning them on the fact that I don't necessarily think technology is the solution to some of the problems that many communities face, but it can help in certain ways to just kind of like ease the translation barrier, for example, or the technology barrier. And also, like, there is this thing about like valorization. So we hear a lot, and the Google Translate launch, which happened recently, is a good example where communities really feel like once their language is on Google Translate, it has this kind of, this kind of status, like it's like I don't want it's like more of a language somehow. It's more official as a language if it's on Google Translate. The fact that some app like represents or includes a language doesn't really mean anything objectively, but there is this kind of feeling of like status that it lends to a language when that happens. So it's really important to extend that. Like one funny quote that we heard after the launch was, so I think they've included Sicilian, which is spoken in Italy, and somebody in the Sicilian community said that it's the most important thing to happen to the language since the 14th century, which I thought was quite good. Finally, I guess one other thing that we could do is to take all this like complexity, all this space of metadata and data, and like as the questioner asked earlier, like how do we fuse this into something which is much easier to use for many more people to use? Like even in the case where there isn't any data, like you can't find any audio data or any text data for the language you're working on, there are always options, like I said, to digitize it or create it. So like things like books in libraries, if we can just scan them in, we can use OCR technology that's pretty advanced these days and just create text data. Or audio data, if it doesn't really exist and you can't find it, there's always the option of just going out and getting it. That's what language documentation people do. That's every year, like more and more of this stuff is created. We just need to make sure that it's available in a way that the whole community that's working on this area can use it for their purposes. So yeah, that's the paper, the second paper from LREC. So please, go have a look. And yeah, just to sum up. So yeah, documenting and mapping out this space of language data and language metadata is a kind of helpful first step on the road to better inclusion. But much more work is required to bring all these pieces together and operationalize it and create useful applications for communities and individuals. And I think it's really important to highlight that many of the languages that we're talking about are spoken in marginalized and disadvantaged communities, and the needs and wishes of those communities should be front and center all the time in our minds. Like whatever the community wants, desires first, say whatever it is, translation or speech stuff or whatever it is, that's what we should do first, instead of offering this kind of standardized rollout of technologies for a language. Yeah, I think that there are, despite the many challenges, there are like really encouraging signs in industry and academia that truly inclusive language technologies are within our reach. And yeah, like as I said before, this requires a lot more work, and there are huge strides that we could take with more contributors and more contributions. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Sandy, for the insightful talk. I'll let anyone has question. If you have question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If you have any question, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If you don't want to unmute as well, you can write in the chat. We'll read it out. And then Sandy will give us an answer to that. Yeah, so maybe I start. So Sandy, for the speech corpora that you are using, it means you are collecting all these speech corpora from online sources, right?
Do you mean at Google?
At Google, yeah.
So we collect data in various different ways. So we do kind of primary collections,
Okay.
where we work with native speakers and have them, read out like text prompts or look at images and describe images, and then we transcribe that data. Or we do like license open source. We obtain commercial licenses for proprietary repositories which already exist, and so like mostly from these companies which create like speech data for technology companies, and we license that data. We do use open source data where it's available, but it's like the volumes are not in the order which is required for commercial applications in many cases. And then like we do in a very strictly controlled way also temporarily maintain user data, where if you opt in to allow Google to retain your data for a certain period of time, then we do maintain that data for, I think the maximum is like a couple of years before it's wiped out. And we use like, basically user logs from apps to improve the experience in that specific app. So that's like, the most relevant in-domain data will improve that app the most.
Oh, okay. And so if for instance you want to collect primary data, it means you try to get a partnership with some university or some local organization, and then you ask it to do this collection for you.
Yeah, that is like one route. So you might have heard of the Wahal project in Accra.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like an example where Google is partnering with local universities, and those data sets are then made open source, so researchers and anyone can use them. But also Google gets access to them and uses them to improve the application. But like, the more, I guess, the more typical situation where we would just pay like another data collection company to do the collection for us. That's the kind of most common case in a commercial setting.
Okay. So please, those online, any questions so far? All right, if there's no question, then we'll say a big thank you to Sandy. I mean, it's interesting because usually a lot of the languages, okay, I'll let Aaron go ahead. Aaron, go ahead with your question.
So please, I didn't get the titles of both papers.
The title of the papers,
Yes.
please.
I think one is LinguaMeta.
Yeah.
And one is
Connecting
Connect.
language technologies with
Yeah.
rich diverse data sources covering thousands of languages. And LinguaMeta, unified metadata for thousands of languages.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So, yeah, as I was saying, I said what is interesting is that the idea of the speech is much more intense compared to the test. And as well, I don't know how many hours you usually have to record different types of people, different accents, different speakers. For instance, if you're talking of native, like a tree speaker, it means you need to consider maybe a foreigner even speaking Tree, even for foreigners speaking Tree, different dialects. If a French person is speaking Tree or a German speaking Tree, an American speaking Tree, all these intonations come in. So it's quite interesting, and to be also interesting, I'm hoping that some of my students can go and check in your LinguaMeta as well and see kind of what we can also use it for. To see how we can check on it. It's interesting. So far you have collected, you have these, so far you've done for about 2,000 languages, or you are targeting 2,000 languages or 1,000 languages
Yeah. So yeah, on what you were saying about speech data, yeah, we do attempt as far as we can to include diverse voices, and that means both within the community and also L2 speakers is a really important thing. That's it's especially an important problem for English, because so many people use our applications in English when they're speakers of other languages originally. So yeah, we do attempt to include many accents and varieties of speech, and then on the number of languages. So it's very difficult to say exactly what the long-term outcomes of all of this work will be, because it really depends a lot on what kind of quality we get with what we have. Data is sometimes more difficult to come by, and the quality is also not consistent. Especially for smaller languages, it's what there is a grain of truth in what Joshi said, that the volumes and the quality are lower. But yeah, we do have a kind of 1,000 languages initiative, which has been discussed by Jeff Dean, who's our sponsor at Google. And I think in the long term, the company has committed to basically making our major technologies, so you translate, speech technologies, other things even like Gemini chatbots and things, available in many more languages. And watch this space. Where I do, as I said at the end, I do think that the situation is improving, and it's becoming easier also with advances in technology to do more with less. So you can get away with a much lower data volume than you could in the past. Like older forms of speech technology, for example, were very sensitive to data volume. You needed hundreds and hundreds of hours of perfectly transcribed speech data in order to get quality. And these days it's much easier to, with pre-trained models and things like that, it's much easier to get away with tens of hours or hundreds of hours.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Sandy, once again, for joining us. And yeah, we are very happy to have learned about some of the things that is ongoing, and we are very happy, appreciative of your comment as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.